And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to what is hopefully the final Lowe Post podcast before I go on vacation and stop thinking about the NBA for a bit. And I wanted to spend one last moment revisiting the event of the offseason and really the season, which is the Kawhi Leonard saga. And I wanted to bring on our Spurs ace reporter, Michael Wright, who was on jury duty the day that Kawhi Leonard finally got traded and thus unavailable because he takes his civic duty that seriously. Mike, what's up?
Dude, I don't know about taking my civic duty seriously. I was trying like crazy to get out of it. I told the judge there's no way I can be unbiased in this case. And they were like, no, you're doing jury duty regardless. But, yeah, great time to be on jury duty, right?
Did you get on a case?
I did, actually. It's not suitable for discussion on the podcast, but yeah, it was an ugly deal, and luckily the guy ended up pleading he did a plea agreement or whatever, and so my duty ended a little earlier than I anticipated.
You couldn't have just said Kawhi Leonard got traded or is about to get traded. I feel like that should get you out.
But you try hard not to play those cards. It's like, first off, I played that card when I was initially summoned, and this was like it was like in March or April I got summoned, and so I did that, and they were like, "Oh no, we need you covering the Spurs." This is what the guy tells me. He's like, "We need you covering the Spurs. We'll just postpone it until July or something." I'm like, "Oh, I thought I was going to get completely out of it, but it didn't work out that way."
Yeah, July is not a good time on the NBA calendar to postpone. Not until you get to like July 20th can you start scheduling non-NBA things. So
right.
The trade has happened, mercifully, for everyone knows. DeMar DeRozan, a top 20 protected first-round pick, and Jakob Poeltl, who's a prospect I like. So this is now 6 days old. You've had time to digest this. The Spurs have had time to digest this. Have you been around the Spurs at all? I mean, what is the sort of, now the earthquake has happened, what is the aftershock? What is the mood down there? For all I know is that you haven't seen or talked to RC, but sort of if you have, or if you've talked to people around the team, what's the mood?
The mood, and strangely enough, it's totally Spurs, but it's all about moving on. It's about moving on. It's about wishing Kawhi Leonard the best in his future endeavors and not trashing the guy on the way out the door because, obviously, his contributions to San Antonio have been immense. He brought this team a championship. And so, they want to just wish him well and move on because they're happy about what they did end up getting in the trade in DeMar DeRozan. And, with DeMar, he's, in the Spurs' estimation, the right kind of guy. And you know how it goes, man. Sometimes you can get enough of those right kinds of guys together, and they can build that camaraderie and everything. And then sometimes what they contribute together might transcend what their individual skill sets are. And I think that's the Spurs' mentality here. I think that they feel like they got the right kind of guy, and they're just ready to move on.
Do you feel like Poeltl is a part of the deal that hasn't been discussed? I don't know what the conversation was like in terms of, I have inklings of it, but in terms of, what young players were discussed, what young players from Toronto were off the table, on the table, whether the Spurs in the end had a choice of this guy or that guy. Do you have a sense of, obviously they targeted DeRozan. DeRozan was the main piece of the deal. They like DeMar. They like how he fits. They want to shoot 75 mid-range jumpers per game next year. It's all lined up for them. Did they love Poeltl? Did they target Poeltl? Do you sense that they chose him over another Raptors prospect, or he was sort of foisted on them as this is the guy you can have because you can't have Anunoby, you can't have Siakam, you can't have anyone else?
Zach, I don't know for sure, but my guess is that's what you just described is what happened. Anunoby would be the guy you want, obviously, and I don't think that he was on the table for the Spurs, and they just got what they could in Jakob Poeltl. And I don't know his game very well, but everything I hear is he's like the perfect fit for what they do in San Antonio. So I'm interested to see what he does. And even though the season for us, really, the season is just now winding down and getting over with. and we're about to go on vacations and everything. But I'm already looking forward to preseason because I'd like to see what this guy has to offer. You know, they say he's a great passer, and, you know, he fits in with what the Spurs do ball movement-wise. So I'm interested to see it.
Yeah, he's a heady player. He moves his feet really well. He has a good feel for the game. He's a big man, and the Spurs clearly like big men and want to remain sort of semi-traditional in terms of size. I think he'll fit, and he's one of the smartest players, period. Not just smartest young players, one of the smartest players, period, that I've talked to about the game. He's a delight to talk to about the game. He's a hard worker. He'll fit there well. I just think it's interesting the way they've talked about something came out about this a couple days ago, sort of confirming what we all suspected, but just like that rebuilding was just not going to be an option there. Even if you took LaMarcus Aldridge, who only has 2 fully guaranteed years left on his deal, even if you took him out of the equation and Powell out of the equation, like it just seems like rebuilding is not something that the Spurs are interested in doing, that they want to remain relevant, I think is the word that's been used. They want to remain in the playoff race. They just weren't going to consider offers that were heavy on draft picks and young players. And by the way, as all the reporting from this sort of trickled in, I think the Celtics offered most of their best draft picks. I mean, I don't think the Celtics just offered, like, you can have a bunch of our picks. I think some of the picks they owe, at least 2 of the picks, if not all of them, that they own from other teams, including the Kings, Grizzlies, and Clippers. I think those were all in the deal. And the Spurs were like, no, we don't want that. I just think it's very interesting because, as you know, this now 20-year run of greatness. And if you zoom even further out, what's interesting about the Spurs is they were, you know, they had a period in the 70s and early 80s where they were also really good. Like, they've been mostly really good, which is what they value. They're sort of like a better version of the Pacers and another ABA alum team. But this particular 20 years started with a semi-accidental and then intentional bottoming out for Duncan. And it just seems like they're just not willing to do that again. And I find that interesting. What have your discussions been like in that regard with them? Have you just found that they're just going to, even if they go now through a period where for the next 4 or 5 years, maybe all they are is a seed between 6 and 10 in the West, like they're cool with that?
I don't know that they're cool with that, Zach. I think they want to be in contention for championships, but like you're absolutely right. There is never any thought to a complete rebuild in San Antonio. And all I can bring you back to is all the conversations I've had with the GM, R.C. Buford. You know, we've talked about these kinds of things. And one thing he always tells me is, Mike, you know what the expectations are in San Antonio. What you got to understand, Zach, man, is that this fan base has been spoiled by this 20-year run of greatness.
That's what I was going to say. They've sort of been spoiled by everything that happened when the last time they bottomed out. Ever since then, it's been nothing but success, and they've been spoiled, but they've been spoiled by the results of getting the number 1 pick in the draft and some others
right.
And some other stuff. Not to diminish all the other smart draft picks they've made, including the draft day trade for Kawhi Leonard, which is, along with Manu in the 50s and Tony in the late 20s, is as good of a draft outcome as you're going to find.
Right. But the thing is now the fans expect the Spurs to make those types of moves. Like, it's not, because Pop will always tell you that, Tim Duncan is the reason we did this. He'll always tell you that. But now the fans expect for the Spurs to find these guys. You go find guys overseas, and you know how it goes. Like, the Spurs were sort of the pioneers of that, but now the rest of the league is caught up. But guess what? Now the fans expect the Spurs to find something else that puts them head and shoulders above the rest. And, I don't know if that's possible, but I'll tell you that the Spurs brass is certainly trying, and so it's going to be interesting to see how it all pans out, But, like, I go back to, like, thinking about this whole Kawhi situation. Even if you have Kawhi, even if Kawhi comes back and everything's great, to me, the Spurs are still in the midst of what I consider to be a transitional period. Now, all the big three, the original big three, is dwindled down. Now you only got one left. And maybe. Yeah, maybe, if he decides to come back. But all signs seem to point that direction. All the fodder, all the, jokes between Pop and Manu on social media and all that stuff. Like, it's it seems to point that he's coming back. This is just my opinion here. But, even if you bring Kawhi back, you are still in that situation. And, it's funny because people think here in San Antonio, they think, okay, Kawhi is gone. So are our chances to win a championship. I don't think you really had those chances to win championships, even with Kawhi on the roster. I mean, because Golden State is just that good. Houston is just that good now. And so, it's interesting, and I think that this was going to happen regardless of whether, you're in this period regardless of whether Kawhi comes back. It's going to be tough to win the West.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I just think that Kawhi is of the age, just turned 27, I think, where you just say, well, if the number one ingredient we have to ever contend again, and by the way, we were up 25 or whatever in game one of the Western Conference Finals 2 seasons ago before Zaza happened, it is a top 5 player. And we have a top 5 player. We can figure some other stuff out. I mean, I think Kawhi is good enough that you transition into the next phase where we're one big move or one hit somewhere away from getting back into that picture, particularly if somebody leaves the Warriors. Chris Paul's 33. I think Kawhi is good enough that you're confident that, hey, maybe we're third now or fourth now, but we're going to be a strong third or fourth. And with the ability, if some things break right, for us to get back to 1 and 2 and push anybody. This is what Toronto's thinking, right? Toronto's thinking, hey, look, we needed a player. If we wanted to remain at 55 wins and contend going forward, like when Kyle Lowry's 35 and we need someone else to be the undisputed guy, DeMar's not good enough. This guy is going to be good enough to justify, let's just keep it going. Instead of rebuilding, let's just keep it going. It's going to be interesting to see how the West shakes out. Have you been in touch with Kawhi's people since this happened?
No, not at all, man. I think they probably hate me.
Why?
Given all the reporting and everything. But, I want to go back to what you were just talking about. That, to me, is the most disappointing part of the whole equation here, is that you thought Kawhi Leonard was going to be that face that ushered in this whole new era of Spurs basketball. That, to me, that's the thing that's just, you just shake your head and you're like, what could they have done? And you just don't know at this point. Like, what could the Spurs have done differently that would have, positively affected this outcome?
Well, we're gonna go over that because you were around for some. We're gonna reset the timetable and go over that. But yeah, going back to what you had said before about the Spurs and their expectations for success. I mean, there is a self-confidence about that franchise that, like, yes, DeJounte Murray can be a star here. He can be an all-star. Like, we can find an all-star level player in the 20s and develop an all-star level player in the 20s. Like, we can do that once. We can do it again. That not a lot of franchises have that level of self-confidence, and I think the Spurs do. And that they've earned it. So you haven't talked to Kawhi's camp. What do you think would have happened if they just said, here's a piece of paper, here's the contract, 5 years, $220 million. Here it is. Take it or leave it.
Boy, that's a tough one. I think that the process or this whole situation would have dragged out a little longer because I don't think that the Spurs actually offered them that Supermax contract.
No, nor do I.
Yeah, and I think though if you put that in front of them, I think things change. But man, that's it's a risky gamble to take because I've talked to lots of people within that organization, and they all felt like hey, if we offered this money, then everything would change, everything would be great. But what kinds of guarantees do we have that we, a year from now, are not in the same situation that we're in right now? And that, that's a hard thing to sell to management because, like I've said this several times, they're divorcing right now. And luckily, I've not been in that situation, but, I'm thinking if it were me in a divorce, the one thing at the forefront of my mind is I'm about to lose half of all my stuff. And, so now you're going to ask me to invest $221 million in a player that played 9 games the season before with no guarantee that, he won't pull the same thing again. And so, that was a tough one. And I think that if the Spurs would have offered that contract to Kawhi, I'm not sure he would have taken it, because at least, from what we've seen so far from Kawhi, money is not a motivating factor for him. He's not a guy driven by that. He's not driven by the fame. We all see that. He's not driven necessarily by the endorsements and all that stuff. That's just not Kawhi. He's not that. He's just a different kind of cat. So it would be great to be a fly on the wall in that room if that were to happen, just because I don't know that he would have taken it.
Yeah, I mean, there's offering and there's offering, right? And you can dance around it and say, well, if this, then if X, Y, and Z are met, then we'll offer you. Or if we can, for the teams trying to trade for Kawhi, if we can get some assurances, or we can meet with his uncle and have a conversation, then maybe. And then there's actually just offering it, saying, hey, here's the paper, turn it down. I dare you to turn it down. And to my knowledge and to yours, that was not a step the Spurs were interested in taking. And I don't disagree with their disinterest in it because of everything that's transpired in the last year. I get it. If you're going to make the biggest possible commitment that you can make to an NBA player in the middle of his career, I think you would want a little bit more confidence than they had in what his productivity and attitude toward the organization and all of those things was going to be over the length of that contract. Now, you just said money and stardom and those things are not a motivator for Kawhi, and I think his seeming disinterest in aggressively chasing that contract would speak to that. However, he did just turn down his Jordan Brand deal, and there was a report. I'm sure you saw the Jeff McDonald story in the Express News from over the weekend. It's about a 3,000-word piece on sort of what went wrong with Kawhi.
Oh yeah, he texted me, and he was texting me throughout the penning of that article.
Well, it had a detail in there that Kawhi goes to the All-Star game in Toronto in 2016, where it was like minus 1,000 degrees the whole weekend, and notices that other superstar players and their family and friends are taken care of in a luxurious way in terms of cars and transportation and I don't know, whatever other perks that maybe he wasn't taken care of in the same way, and that began to get him wondering, like, hey, I'm a star too. What other franchises? Right. I did this big profile on Trevor Ariza in the playoffs, and this didn't make the story, but a lot of people told me he's like Trevor Ariza is like a basketball purist. He was compared frequently by members of the Rockets to a Gasol brother, and I said, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be like a basketball purist in the sense of a Gasol brother? And he said one of the things that sort of irritates Trevor, that in Houston and elsewhere he's had to come to grips with, is even though this is a team and it's a family and we're all going out to dinner and this, there are different rules for superstars than there are for everybody else. Superstars get stuff that we don't get. And he's just sort of had to swallow his idyllic vision of what basketball is supposed to be and remain a productive teammate, even though that kind of stuff ignores him. So that stuff exists, and Kawhi allegedly in this story wants it. And I have to say, I heard similar noise from other teams, not the Raptors, that were in and around the Kawhi trade discussions, that when you started talking to his people about, hey man, what happened? It can't just be all the injury and the different diagnosis, like what happened? That this is an issue that was brought up, that, there are ways that franchises are supposed to treat superstars and ways that superstars are supposed to have their own set of rules and standards, and the Spurs they don't do that. That's Tim Duncan. That's the Spurs. That's how they operate. And that annoyed him. Did you hear any of that?
Well, okay, let me say this. The story about the All-Star game I've heard that story from several people. So it's true. But having talked to people, within that organization, their rebuttal to that is we were at the forefront of making sure that all of our All-Stars were taken care of that way. Like, we made sure they had their own transportation, their own, luxurious transportation. And I know for a fact that this past year during the All-Star game, they gave LaMarcus a car, because I remember one of the Spurs staffers telling me they give LaMarcus this super dope ride, and he used it twice throughout the whole All-Star weekend or whatever. And so, yes, that did happen.
Interesting.
But I've heard that the Spurs do take care of their guys like that.
Well, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Spurs were one of the first and most open organizations to having, with some understanding that it shouldn't happen all the time and on every trip, but with having family on the team plane and family on the road trips if players asked for it, or especially players of certain stature.
Right. And again, this comes down to what the issue has always been between the Spurs and Kawhi Leonard. That's communication. It's hard to get Kawhi to say 3 words to you. So I'm sure if Kawhi would have said, hey, I want a Bentley, or I want this, or whatever, the Spurs would have done everything in their power to make that happen for him. So, I get it. And, one thing I say when I discuss the whole Kawhi situation is that, it's like one day Kawhi woke up and realized he was a superstar in this league. It just all of a sudden it happened. It was like the lights came on and he's like, hey, I'm a star in this league and this is how I should be treated. And then you saw all the problems start. So, yeah, I've heard other all-star stories too. I'll have to share one with you, not on the podcast one day, man. New Orleans.
It was in New Orleans? This one? Wait, yeah. There were 2 recent.
This one was in New Orleans.
Okay.
And all I can say is it ended up where Kawhi is walking through the Mardi Gras crowd with a hoodie on to the arena.
Okay.
With Spurs security in tow.
That was 2014 then, I think, or whatever. No, more recent. 15. Okay.
Right.
I get my All-Star. I lose track. Okay. Well, you can't say anymore. I don't want you to say anymore.
Now. Yep, you guessed it. I'm a speed bump, so I've got one job. I slow you down. So imagine how I feel about Geico, who does way more. Like, not only could they save you money on car insurance, but they've been around for over 75 years, giving people fast and friendly claim service. Ow. Plus, they got a nifty mobile app that gives you 24/7 access. Ow. Just doing my job, buddy.
Geico. Expect great savings and a whole lot more.
You talked about the sort of the ongoing weirdness and saga of this. So here is a timetable of 10 days in the life of the Spurs that you lived. Are you ready?
Okay.
March 7th, 2018. Kawhi hasn't played in 2 months, and comes out and talks to the media for the first time, I believe, in that stretch, and says things like, there's no friction between me and the organization. I think that was the famous, now infamous, quote unquote, for sure, end quote. He wanted to spend the rest of his career with the Spurs, and he said stuff about, sorry, I'm a competitor. If I thought I could play, I'd play. I want to play. Were you there that day? I'm sure you were. And what do you remember about that? Did everyone know he was going to talk that day? Was it organized hastily? Were Spurs officials floating around to see what he would say? What was the vibe like?
Oh no, I was absolutely there, and the whole reason for that presser was, for weeks we had all been asking the Spurs PR people, hey, can we get Kawhi? Can we get Kawhi? And they're like, we'll get him for you whenever he decides he wants to talk. And so, I think that Kawhi reluctantly agreed to do that interview because the Spurs PR staff, they were constantly saying, hey, can you address the media finally? And so when he did it, I will say that, for instance, when the question came out about him wanting to be a Spur for life or whatever, he was like, for sure. It wasn't necessarily I didn't feel assured that he was coming back. I'll tell you that much. But, I thought there was some clarity. There was some clarity when he started to talk about how he and Pop had been in contact the whole time. They talk every day. And so Pop knows everything I'm doing in New York and blah, blah, blah. So I was like, oh, okay. So this is not as bad as what maybe we were thinking. But, and then when he comes out and he says there's no friction, well, obviously Woj and I, we reported that when we were the first to report that. And I was kind of like, that ain't true, man. Because obviously I had talked to several people, and, we knew about this friction for a long time before we actually reported it. Like, I felt like we gave the San Antonio Spurs a pass for a long time until it just got to the point to where we were like, we got to report this, because if we don't, somebody else is going to. So we have to put it out there.
There was a third byline on that story in January, a tagline anywhere, and that was me.
Yes.
and the reason that happened was, so I'm looking at January 13th, Kawhi, after missing 4 games, reappears in the lineup against the Nuggets, scores 19 points on 5 of 8 shooting, a bunch of free throws. Does not play 2 nights later against the Hawks in Atlanta. Then they come to Brooklyn January 17th. I think he warmed up for that Hawks game and decided he couldn't go. Comes to Brooklyn January 17th. Right before that game comes the announcement that he's out indefinitely. And it surprised people because the word indefinitely, because he had just played. I mean, all 9 of his games had just come within a span of a month before that. And most of the front office was there, along with all the coaches, obviously. And I was at that game. And the mood of the team that day was morose. And if you talked to anybody that day, you knew immediately there was something seriously wrong in the relationship between Kawhi and the Spurs. And, that a trade, not at the deadline because it was too soon, but a trade in the offseason was out of the question. Now, I hadn't been around the team much, if at all, I don't remember, until those couple of days in that game. You've been around the team a lot. Like, January 17th, to me, as an outsider not covering the Spurs, parachuting into a random Nets Spurs game, it was like, oh my God. Like, this is not a normal, like, this is not normal. This is a catastrophe waiting to happen. And then we put that story out, and the world told us, of course, it was stupid and it was all inaccurate, and now Kawhi plays for the Raptors.
This is true, but I wasn't there that day for that shoot around, but all the descriptions of the scene were also that the Spurs were surprised. Like, Pop was surprised. Like, it was just like, okay, Kawhi had just played, arguably his best game in his comeback against the Nuggets. As a matter of fact, that was the last time, because Jeff McDonald and me talked to Kawhi that night after the game. We were the only 2 reporters that talked to him because we waited all night for him to come out. And, so before that March press conference, that was the last time he had talked. But I was told that guys were, like, really surprised, especially Pop. Pop was like, I don't even know what's going on here. But, yeah, he's out indefinitely, and, this is the announcement or whatever. So, yeah, like, at that point, it was kind of like, okay, now some of this tension is starting to surface, and we have to report it. And I remember when we were about to report it, you were kind of like, don't put my name on that. I'll just do a contributing line.
Yeah, I just wanted to be.
Because you knew how big it was going to be.
That it was more I knew how noisy it was going to be, and I had just been around the team that day for a few hours. I didn't want to overstate my influence on the story or overstate what I had, quote unquote, what I had contributed to the story. So that's January 13th. March 7th, he talks. We just talked about that. 8 days later, March 15th, during a nationally televised game, the Spurs are playing, wait a second. It was around I don't know if it was March 15th. It was like a week later. Lisa Salters on TV reports that Kawhi may be coming. Was it OKC game? So that must be March 10th. That must be March 10th then. So 3 days later, after he talks, she reports that he's targeting the Pelicans game on March 15th. So what in the hell is going on in like those 96 hours between when Kawhi talks, when Lisa Salters breaks a story on national TV that he's targeting the Pelicans game, and then the Pelicans game where he doesn't play? Like, what do you remember? Those must have been a wild 96 hours of just crazy information flying around.
Okay, well, here's the story, because I was in Oklahoma City, and for whatever reason, like in the OKC media room, they have all the TVs up, and for whatever reason, they had like a raw feed of Lisa's rehearsals. Like she's rehearsing, the report about Kawhi is supposed to come back against the New Orleans Pelicans. She's rehearsing it, and I'm like hearing it, and I'm like, and luckily I was the only guy in the media room. Nobody was in there. And I'm hearing it, and I'm like literally, Zach, I'm texting, I'm calling, I'm emailing bosses like, hey, Lisa's reporting this. You know, she hasn't technically reported it yet, but this is what she's rehearsing. And anyway, so I checked with some of my Spurs people, and they were like, yes, this is when he's coming back. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So, you know, we got it here. And, you know, in the aftermath of it, when he didn't play against the Pelicans, you know, I started talking to more people, and they were like, look, Kawhi was telling Pop, Kawhi was telling RC, Kawhi was telling his teammates that was when he was coming back, and he just didn't. So, you know, that's basically what happened with that. I mean, Lisa Salter's sources were solid on that, and they just decided, or Kawhi decided that he wasn't ready to come back.
So
and
is he?
It was a lot of that. There was a lot of that going on throughout the year. Like, you know, he would just call Pop and say, hey, you know, I don't feel confident in the leg or whatever. You know, I thought I could go, but I can't go, and so I'm not going. Like, that's what would happen.
So in those intervening days between the 7th and the 15th, when he's reportedly maybe coming back and then doesn't, I assume he's around the team. Is he practicing? Do we see him doing basketball things? We see him like interacting with his teammates, like all of what do we see in that time?
No, we don't see any of that because, I mean, if you've been around the Spurs long enough, you know that when they let the media in, by the time they let the media in, they're finishing up practice.
Right, but guys are still shooting and playing around.
Right. But every time we would go in there, Kawhi would not be there. And, like, every now and then you kind of peer over and look into, like, inside their gym, like, at the very back, there's a weight room back there. And so you see Kawhi in there doing different, you know, exercises and stuff like that, but you would never see him on the court. And, you know, so, like, you try to zoom in real close with your iPhone and try to take a picture of him just to post it on Twitter or something. But, yeah, so he would always be in the weight room and not on the court with the guys.
Then March 15th is the Pelicans game. He doesn't play. March 17th, 2 days later, is what appears to have been the sort of flashbulb moment in this entire saga, which is the team meeting, players-only meeting, after the Minnesota game on the 17th, which, depending on who you talk to, was either nothing, something, a lot, the end of the road. Danny Green is quoted in Jeff's story saying, "I still don't really know what happened with all of this." A couple of players, I think Derek White and Rudy Gay, pushed back on the idea that the players-only meeting was really that serious. Others sort of doubled down on it being serious. What do you? I mean this in the most literal sense. That game was home against Minnesota.
Yep.
I mean, what do you remember? Do you remember guys coming out of the locker room just leaving? Do you remember trying to get guys to open up and not much came out because Tony Parker said his team busy? Like, what is that scene like?
Actually, it was a strange scene because typically after a game, the Spurs will make a couple of their guys come out and do interviews, post-game interviews with their partner TV station or whatever. That didn't happen this time. So all like these people are waiting outside of the locker room for, you know, their typical post-game interview. Well, they didn't get them. And so that was kind of weird. And then it took us a long time to get into the locker room. It was really weird. As a matter of fact, I think Ramona was actually there. And they wouldn't let us in. It was weird. And so once we finally got in the locker room, everybody was gone. I mean, there were like one or two players standing around, and we were like, okay, this is unacceptable. You know, as a matter of fact, I believe an email went to the league office about the whole situation. It was strange. Okay, I get home that night, 3-4 o'clock in the morning, I get a call. Hey, this is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing about this team meeting, and, you know, can you check into this? I'm like, all right. So I started checking into it, and sure enough, it did happen. And, you know, that, like you said, I wouldn't say that was the end, but that's when things really escalated because the next thing you know, what was it, a couple days later, they had a team picture or whatever. And at the team picture, we asked about Kawhi because Kawhi was there. He was suited up. He was joking with Pop and everything. It looked okay. And we started talking to Manu Ginobili, and he's like, hey, you've got to make some type of effort to be around the guys,
Those are the comments that I think have been forgotten. Tony's 100 times worse comment has obviously been very much remembered and perhaps blown a little bit out of proportion.
Yes.
Manu's comments about we have to pretend like we have to sort of play as if he's never coming back, which I just took. Right. I wasn't there when you said that, obviously, but I just took that as sort of a coping mechanism that just sort of like we all have coping mechanisms in our daily life to sort of get us through certain events. That struck me as a very rational way to deal with it. Like for me to play my best, I just got to block it out and go. But this one where he says, you got to make an effort to be around your team. I'm paraphrasing, but it's about the dinners. It's about the bus rides. It's about the camaraderies, and you got to make an effort. That's the one that I feel like that would have stung me a little bit if I were Kawhi. And by the way, Manu's right, and few people in the league value those things more than Manu and the Argentine guys who came with him to the NBA. Manu has a famous no room service rule when they're on the road. They had the famous United Nations dinner club with him and Splitter and Diaw and Mills. I mean, it's a huge part of what he conceives of as team building. But that's pointed. That's as pointed as Manu gets.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And then, after that's over with, after the team photo is over, they go into the shoot-around. Well, as soon as the team photo was over, Kawhi was out of there. He left. So he didn't even stick around for shoot-around. As a matter of fact, I think that was going into that Minnesota game that we were just talking about. That was the night that they had that team meeting, I believe. I believe it was the same night. And then after that, you didn't see Kawhi again.
So what do you think happened in the meeting? Now that we've had all this time, it's now 4 months ago that this team meeting happened, and it was controversial and it was reported there were divided opinions. I don't want to get into who said what in this. I mean, Tony Parker has been described as the quote ringleader of it by Jeff McDonald in the Express News. I don't know what that means really, but what do you think actually happened?
That's true. That's exactly what happened. Tony was kind of he quarterbacked the whole thing. But it was just more of them trying to get a feel for when Kawhi might be back. Hey, we're about to make a playoff run. You have any idea when you're going to be back? And, put yourself in Kawhi's shoes and you have your team coming at you like that. You're going to be a little bit, just a little taken aback by that, I believe. And, in that meeting, Kawhi basically stood his ground. He's like, I'll be back when I'm ready to come back. And, I had heard, this is before the aggregators get a hold of this, I had heard this, that Kawhi had said something about I'll do anything for all you guys in this room, but not this organization. That's what I heard that he had said.
Wow.
And but he stood his ground and said, hey, I'm trying to get back. But I also heard that during that meeting, a lot of those guys were supportive. They were like, okay, we want what's best for you long term. We'd rather have you here long term doing what Kawhi Leonard does as opposed to risking your health, your future health, by trying to get you back as soon as possible. A lot of guys relayed that sentiment.
That's fascinating. Then, of course, Kawhi never played again for the Spurs. What do we know, if anything, about Pop and Kawhi meeting in San Diego? It was right around the draft lottery. It was right around the draft, rather. Sorry, not the lottery. It was right around the draft. I remember Woj and I were in the lobby of the hotel where all the lottery prospects stay because everyone's milling around there for 48 straight hours. And we were both saying to each other what we had heard about this meeting, had it happened. It was so secretive that it was unclear whether it had happened or not, or if it was still going to happen and who was there. Do we know anything about it now that we're, I believe it was just the two of them. Do we know it? Or maybe Kawhi had other people there with him. What do we know?
No, it was just Kawhi and Pop from what I understand. And I was told that it was a very brief meeting. And, I wasn't told details of what was said, but I was told that meeting lasted 10 minutes. And when I heard that, I was just like, that's not a good sign if the meeting only lasted 10 minutes.
Yeah, I had heard it went badly, or it went bad. It just went badly in that there was not a positive resolution, obviously, for the Spurs. And so 10 minutes would dovetail with that, certainly.
Right. And also, the funny thing about that is even after that, even after the trade demand, him saying that he wanted to be traded, even after all that, believe it or not, the Spurs still held out hope that they would find a way towards reconciliation. They thought that there was something that they could do to make everything okay. That's why that whole trade situation dragged on for so long. They didn't want to trade him. They did not want to move that guy. And this is the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that, Pop cares for Kawhi deeply. RC cares for Kawhi as a person deeply. And so, it was almost like you're asking us to trade our son away, almost. I mean, like they were that close to Kawhi, or they felt they were. They had that type of relationship. So they thought throughout the whole thing that they would be able to find a way to come to some type of common ground. And that, the funny thing is, like, I sort of knew that he was gone. Like, as soon as it came out that he wanted to be traded, I was like, he's done. There's nothing the Spurs are going to be able to do to fix this whole thing. But I don't think the Spurs believe that.
No, I think so. That was a Friday, whenever the hell that was, that all of a sudden 4 reporters got the simultaneous text that Kawhi wants out. And then RC spoke on it with the media X amount of days later. I don't remember exactly.
At the draft.
It was at the draft.
After the draft. Yeah.
That was legitimate and honest from the heart. That wasn't, we're trying to get leverage by saying we want to repair the relationship. I mean, obviously, that's a nice side effect of saying something like that. But that was real right up until I don't know when they finally decided it's all over. But at that moment they thought this is not irreparable from our perspective, right?
Right. That's exactly what they thought. They thought that we've got a chance, and I can remember talking to people and them telling me, that Pop is at his best when things are at their worst. And so they had a lot of faith that Pop was going to be able to be the guy to turn the whole situation, and it just didn't happen. And, like I said, it's unfortunate. Zach, I'm sorry, as I was saying that, I just thought of something else.
Go.
There's one thing that we don't talk about. Like, none of us have ever talked about it. But you do realize that Kawhi's best friend is still on the Spurs coaching staff, right?
I don't.
Yes. Jeremy Castleberry. Like, I would love to do a story on the guy because, he was sort of in the middle of all this. Kawhi's his best friend. They played ball together in high school and college. I guess Kawhi got him on the Spurs coaching staff. They're best friends or whatever. And so that every day when he's out there practicing, working out, guys, they're asking him, hey, what's up with your boy? And, like, just to see the way that kid handled that whole situation, like, I really hope, I sincerely hope that one day he's a guy that does enough to sort of elevate himself to one of those, those top assistant positions, something like that, because he handled that whole situation like a pro. And, it's funny because the Spurs, they knew the type of relationship they had, but the Spurs would not, they didn't want to put Jeremy Castleberry through all that. So they wouldn't say, hey, can you talk to Kawhi for us? Right. Or try to get intel on Kawhi or anything like that. They didn't want to put him through that because they didn't feel like it was fair to him. And the kid came out every day and had all this enthusiasm. He coached the hell out of the players. And, I actually was checking before I came on to this podcast. I was like, hey, I just want to know, is Jeremy still on the staff? And they were like, yeah, he's still on the staff. I'm like, okay, cool. I just wanted to know before I complimented the guy. But, yeah, he would be a fascinating story, I think.
Yeah, the Spurs, I mean, maybe Kawhi's relationship got him in a foot in the door, but the Spurs don't hire people for reasons other than you're going to be a good coach or we think you're going to be a good coach. And so,
yeah,
it would be snarky to sort of joke like, I wonder how long he's going to be with the Spurs. But if the Spurs think he's good, he's going to be with the Spurs. And
no, they love him.
Yeah, they wouldn't have hired him if they didn't think he was good. I don't know him at all. Now that I'm Googling him, I recognize him and I've shook hands with him a couple times, but I don't know him. But if he's a Spur, that means they think he's good. He's good. You wrote when Kawhi finally got traded, you released a piece about the Spurs sort of entering uncharted waters for them of franchise uncertainty. which I assume could have been written at any time in the last 4 months. But you had a tidbit in there that I don't think I had seen before, which was the Spurs, at least some higher-ups within the Spurs, wanted Kawhi to let the team rule him out for the season, and he would not let them do it. Because just for the sake of clarity, now that's fascinating. When is that all swirling around this March period where things start to break down? Does that desire from those higher ups, is that January? Does it even predate March? Like, when is that happening? And that's clearly communicated to Kawhi, I guess, right?
Right. This is around February and March. Because it got to the point to where, every day the Spurs are having to answer questions that they don't necessarily have the answers to because they're not, they're not privy to all the medical stuff that's going on, all the information, because Kawhi obviously is in New York. And, it just got to the point to where they felt like, it would just be better to not be dealing with this and we can concentrate on the team that we have on the floor right now. Let's concentrate on that. We don't need to be worried about a guy that's not here. And so, they had hoped that they could declare him out for the season, but Kawhi was just like, no, I'm coming back. Because in Kawhi's mind, he was coming back. I think a lot of people want to, because in these situations, everybody wants to find the boogeyman. Everybody's got to, point the finger at who they think is the bad guy in the situation. But Kawhi genuinely did plan on coming back. I would talk to guys that were actually in New York with Kawhi training, and they would tell me about just the crazy workouts he was doing. They were telling me about like how this guy would stand under the basket, and he'd be throwing this medicine ball, just slamming it against the wall, and he'd just at the end of it he'd throw it back as far as he could, almost all across the court and stuff. I'm like, really? And they're like, yes, this guy is trying like mad to get back. So a lot of people want to say, oh, Kawhi quit on the team. That's not true. He was trying like crazy to get back. He just couldn't. For whatever reason, he just never felt 100% on that quadriceps. And so, like I said, the Spurs wanted to declare him out, but he wanted to play. And, that's a hard one. Like, you're going to tell your franchise player, because at that point, you're not thinking that, here in a couple months we're going to trade him to Toronto. That's not what you're thinking. He's our franchise guy. He's our franchise guy now and into the future. So, okay, if he thinks he can come back, then let him keep on working out and trying to get back to where he's ready to go. And I think that was, I don't know if that caused any tension in the relationship, but I do know that the Spurs, by that point, had sort of grown tired of the whole situation, and they just wanted to say, okay, he's out. Let's concentrate on our guys.
Was there any universe in which they would have taken this to training camp, or was there? You said tired. I remember batting around, Kawhi stuff, obviously for months with people all over the league, and a couple people on other teams who had been through not maybe similar situations, but sort of prolonged dramas said to me, at some point, decision fatigue just sets in, and your whole organization is just exhausted by it, and you just want to be done. And I bet that happens to the Spurs at some point. This was when I was talking with a couple people about, do you think he comes to camp? And they both said no. This is just taking such a toll on the Spurs. They'll just cut bait. Do you think there was? I mean, was there any part of them that wanted to see what would happen if he in September, or was it at some point just too late to even think about it?
No, I think that they thought that because they were like just people that you talk to, it would be like, if we get him back out here, and he reports to camp and everything, we maybe throughout the season can work on mending the relationship. I think that there was some thought, to that, hey, let's get him back. And, you know how it goes, Zach, like winning cures all. So we get him back, we win some games, and he plays great, and then we can sort of work on that relationship throughout. But then there became, like, you'd hear reports out there that there was a chance that Kawhi might sit out if he has to come back with the Spurs. And, I remember, thinking, well, there's mechanisms in place that would not necessarily prevent him from sitting out, but it would make it really costly for him. And I know that the Spurs did not even want to have that fight. They didn't want to have that. They didn't even want to deal with that whole situation. Like, okay, what if he decides to sit? You know, they don't want to go and whatever legal process they have to go through. They didn't want to do any of that stuff. They just wanted to. I think, like you said, decision fatigue had set in by that point, and they were like, maybe it's best that we both part ways.
Yeah, and if you don't, there's a lot of NBA players, if you really don't want to play and you really don't want to stay with a certain team, you want them to trade you. And there was noise about this about Kyrie, and I believe it was somewhat accurate at least. There's a lot of players there's always a knee surgery you can get. There's always a knee cleanup you can get for a lot of guys. I don't know if Kawhi was in that. Kawhi's injury is like that, where there's some operation, there's some procedure that, you want to bring me back? Okay, I can elect to do this in September. It would have been fascinating, but now we move on. Kawhi is a Raptor, which is just crazy. I mean, do you ever sit back and think, boy, I might cover the league for 20 more years and never have a situation quite as nutty as this? I mean, this is so nutty. This is so nutty that in a year we're going to know, I think, substantially more about what happened in San Antonio than we do now, simply because more people will talk. But this has just been crazy, huh?
It has, man. And to be honest with you, though, I'm sort of glad it's over. It's just like, because it's every day, and, whether you're hearing just crazy stories or, I mean, Zach, it got to the point where, like, for me, I would, like, get calls and texts just from people just coming out of the woodwork. Like, like we did the story about the whole Jordan deal, about him turning that down. Dude, that was just some random text that somebody sent me and was like, hey, because I used to cover the NFL. I did that for 10 years before I moved to NBA. One of my NFL contacts hit me up and was like, hey, I want to introduce you to somebody that can tell you a lot about this whole Kawhi thing. And so, so I talked to this guy, and you're like, oh, man, but it was like every other day I'd get a text or a call from somebody. Like, it wasn't like, and I'm not saying this to diminish my own work ethic at all, but I'm saying it's like, it wasn't like I was, out chasing everything. Like, sometimes people would just call you and tell you a story, and then you'd follow up on it, and then you learn more, and you're like, oh, man, like, how deep does this rabbit hole go? and so I was just, it was just tiring. It was tiring for me because it was just always, people wanted to know what was going on with Kawhi, and all I could tell them is, what I would hear from my sources, because obviously Kawhi is not talking. And so it was a tough deal. It really was.
Well, it's over now, and then we get to zoom out, and this is a conversation for the fall and going forward. Just sort of, okay, where do the Spurs go now? Because they're a good team in an absolutely loaded. Maybe that's Kawhi calling you. There's a good team in an absolutely loaded conference. They are not really going to have cap flexibility after next season. Right now, they have about $99 million to $100 million on the books for 19-20, and that only includes the, I believe, $6.7 million guaranteed portion of Powell. And then after that 2019-20 season, LaMarcus's deal is non-guaranteed. DeMar has a player option, and then maybe you can start thinking about starting over. But they clearly, I think, traded for DeMar with the idea of, okay, if our LaMarcus experience ends in 2021 or whenever it ends, DeMar is going to be the guy to keep us at least relevant while we figure out how to be better than relevant. And I don't know that DeMar is quite that good as a standalone guy, and if he's not, and the Spurs decide he's not, and Murray doesn't take a giant leap to become a star, which could happen, there's so much in flux for them now, as you wrote in that piece, that the next year, 18 months, the information they learn about their own players and the decisions they make on, like, they love these non-guaranteed or partially guaranteed deals for LaMarcus and Powell and blah, blah, blah. It's going to be really, we didn't even talk about Lonnie Walker. Like, it's going to be really interesting to see how they navigate this, because it doesn't get any easier now.
No, definitely. And then, like, you think, like, okay, are they going to have to change the way they play? Because throughout this year, this 20-year run of dominance, the Spurs have had to change the way they played on the court, and so, like, with this whole situation with DeMar DeRozan, I'm just, like, looking at it like, you got too much mid-range game. You don't have any shooters. Like, what are you going to do here? Like, because that's what LaMarcus does. He's a mid-range guy. That's what DeMar does. And at this point, DeJounte Murray, he doesn't have any range yet. He hasn't, he's not that good a shooter yet. And so you're like, okay, what's Pop going to cook up to take advantage of all their talents? And so I think that is going to be something that will be really interesting to watch, how they change, because they're going to have to. They can't play the same way anymore. And, you go and get Marco Bellinelli, you got Davis Bertans, but those are about the only two proven shooters that you have. So, it's going to be interesting. And I will say, just based off my experience with the Spurs, like, you can't count them out. I think they'll make some noise. It wouldn't shock me if they went into the season and won 50 games. That would not shock me at all. Because they won 47 or something like that without Kawhi last year. And
they're going to be good. I mean, the Spurs are going to
win games.
If you told me they win 50, I wouldn't be surprised. The Spurs are good, and as I said last week, like they execute. They play good team defense. Like they'll make DeMar a better defender because he will have no other choice. They will find a way to be a top 8 defense because that's what they always do. My worry for them is they play in a team with at least 12 really good playoff contenders, and the Spurs just. How they fatten up those win totals every year is outplaying and out-executing dumb and/or young teams. And they do not have any of those in the Western Conference outside of Phoenix and Sacramento. And so they're just going to have tough game after tough game. But so is everybody else in the West. The Spurs are like a high floor, low ceiling team. Like there's not a lot of game to game variability for how good they're going to be and what their margins are going to be. And that floor just destroys all the dumb young teams in the league. But the ceiling is going to have problems against the good Western Conference teams when they play well. But they're going to be good. The problem is everyone in the West is going to be good. I said this before. If you told me there's not a single playoff lock in the Western Conference outside of Houston and Golden State, I would disagree. But I wouldn't say you're nuts. Like, I think Oklahoma City's probably a lock. Utah's close. And I am never going to predict that LeBron is missing the playoffs. That LeBron is going to play in a conference where 8 teams are better than his team if he plays 70 to 75 games. I don't care what misfits are around him. I would probably end up with 4.5 to 5 locks max. It's just going to be a bloodbath out there.
It is, but it's going to be fun to watch. It really is. And, for the Spurs, like this season, regardless of what the outcome is, at least it represents somewhat of a change from, think about this. You've gone through this run of success for 20 years and you've had no drama. And then all of a sudden, this last season, you get all the drama that you can handle. So, regardless of the outcome for next season, it's kind of like, well, at least we will have finally gotten away from the drama, man. Because it was exhausting. It really was. And, obviously we're always going to be asking Pop and RC and all those guys about Kawhi, especially when they play the Raptors and things like that. But I don't think the drama will ever reach the level it did this past season, man.
Spurs, Raptors at Spurs, whenever that is. It's not going to be LeBron going back to Cleveland or anything like that. I mean, it may not even be Durant going back to Oklahoma City. But that's going to be fun. That's going to be a different kind of atmosphere than San Antonio's crowd has had, like, ever, basically. But that's going to be a weird game.
It'll be rocking. When you're around San Antonio, and I'm sure you've seen it, like, one of the things that I think is really cool about San Antonio is that, all the murals they paint of the Spurs. And, in the aftermath of this whole thing, they're defacing those murals with Kawhi Leonard's face on there, man. I saw somebody tweeted something. It was a picture, and they had like a red circle with a slash through it over Kawhi's face. And it was written in Spanish, but basically the translation was, tell your uncle thank you or something like that. but yeah, so, you got that going on all around town right now. Like right now, the city of San Antonio is being very petty about this whole thing. But I guarantee you, when he finally comes back to the AT&T Center, I see that like multiplying times 10. Like, it's going to be ugly, man. Like, they're going to boo him, and, you know, it's going to be fun to watch because, you know, like, even for Kawhi, like, dude, like, I don't think he's ever really been in that situation where he was sort of the heel, so to speak. You know, he's always been the beloved guy. So that'll be interesting to see how he handles that whole dynamic, too.
It's still crazy to think about, but now we have a whole offseason to think about it. Mike, your work all year on this and other Spurs-related issues, because they were a basketball team that won some games and made the playoffs and all that.
One time.
Has been outstanding, and I look forward to more of it next year. And I told you this would be a short podcast. It didn't end up being a short podcast. It was too good, but thank you so much for your time.
All right, my man. You have a good one.